Hello, welcome to the Strathcona Regional District Electoral Area A Community Wildfire Protection Plan video. This is a video presentation that is supplementary to a formal report submitted to the Strathcona Regional District. The full CWBP report and maps can be downloaded from the SRD website for further reference. My name is Colin Philiter. I'm a professional forester from Wildfire that helped write this report, along with my colleague Cynthia Liu, also a professional forester. In this video, we'll provide an overview of the Strathcona Regional District Community Wildfire Protection Plan. We'll discuss where the study area of the CWPP takes place, review the results of the local wildfire threat and risk assessments, the application of the FireSmart program, and review the 29 recommendations that were made in the report. Electoral Area A is one of 4 jurisdictions in the Strathcona Regional District. It is comprised of over 900,000 hectares. However, it is very sparsely populated, with census data reporting only 764 residents that are not within a municipal boundary. For this plan, the study area was narrowed down to 5 areas based on the following criteria. The area had to have more than 6 structures per square kilometer, which means it's in the wildland-urban interface. The area was not already covered under a community-specific community wildfire protection plan or within a municipal boundary, and the area had to have permanent residents living there year-round. We were also given guidance from the SRD on which areas to cover. One of the study areas is Esperanza, which is a remote community on the west coast of Vancouver Island. It's the site of a historic mission hospital and is now a Christian community that offers youth camps. Access there is only by boat or float plane. The most western study area in the CWPP was Walters Island. It's located across from the First Nation community of Cayucit. A few smaller adjacent islands also have residents and infrastructure. There are no roads on Walter Island or any of the other adjacent smaller islands. Access, again, is by boat or float plane only. Cayucit, which is across from Walters Island, received a community-specific community wildfire protection plan also in 2020. Sayward Valley is the most populated area within Electoral Area A. Residents are spread throughout the valley on rural acreages on either side of Sayward Road, Highway 19, and the Salmon River. Sayward Valley has close ties to the village of Sayward, but for administrative purposes, the valley and the village are addressed in separate community wildfire protection plans. Sayward Valley has fire protection from the village of Sayward's volunteer fire department. It is the only area in the CWPP that has fire coverage. Browns Bay is an area that has several residential homes, but the main infrastructure there is Brown Bay's Resort, a private resort, marina, and RV campground that attracts mainly summer season visitors. Browns Bay is also the site of Browns Bay Packing, which is a fish processing plant. Browns Bay is located on the eastern portion of Vancouver Island, right on the ocean front, and is connected to Highway 19 by Brown Bay's Road, which is a one-way in and out access road. Eagles Cove is also located on the waterfront of Vancouver Island and is an isolated collection of private lots and recreational properties. It is accessed by Elk Bay Forest Service Road at its junction with Highway 19 near Roberts Lake. Wildfire threat is directly related to the likelihood of dangerous and hazardous fuel igniting and fire spreading into the community, either directly or through ember transport. As part of this community wildfire protection plan, we incorporated threat assessment data and calculations that were developed by BC Wildfire. The fuel type around the community has a large impact on the threat score. Fuel type influences the head fire intensity, which is the energy or heat intensity of a fire. The spotting impact, which is the ability for the wildfire to spread to adjacent areas, also impacts the threat. The other factor is the historically recorded fire density of an area, which includes both human-caused and lightning-caused ignitions. In our calculations, we found that Sayward Valley is mostly low to moderate threat, although there are a few pockets of high. It has numerous historical fires, with the most recent fire occurring in 2019 from a human-caused backyard burn of waste. The historical fire of 1938, known as the Sayward Fire, also burned 12,000 hectares on Vancouver Island, including portions of the Sayward Valley. Browns Bay was calculated as a moderate threat. Eagles Cove is mostly low with some moderate threat. Walters Island calculated mostly moderate. Esperanza is also mostly moderate. The next step in our process was the local wildfire risk classification, which implies the consequences of a fire. Again, this calculation is conducted by parameters developed by BC Wildfire and done in GIS software. There's multiple factors, with one of them being 30% of the wildfire threat that we just discussed, 30% is the proximity of the community to the threat, 30% is fire spread patterns, which are influenced by wind, and then 10% is the slope position and the slope percentage. It should be noted that the proximity of the fuel has a significant impact on the risk. Fuels within 100 meters of the community are at a higher risk than the same fuel type that might be 500 meters away. The local wildfire risk assessment calculated that Sayward Valley had the highest risk of the 5 study areas, primarily due to its higher structure density and proximity to hazardous fuel. 7 areas were identified in the Sayward Valley as potential fuel treatment areas, something we will discuss later in the video. Walters Island, Esperanza, Eagles Cove, and Browns Bay were mostly low risk, and no fuel treatments were recommended. A common discussion point in this video is around FireSmart, which is a national initiative to provide communities, property owners, and residents the tools to assess the fire hazard around their homes. It also provides strategies to start reducing those hazards. FireSmart is a shared responsibility involving all levels of government and involves participation from the private sector and community leaders. The biggest aspects of FireSmart are fuel and debris management around homes and building materials that are fire resistant. This photo shows a neighborhood in Fort McMurray after the 2016 wildfire. Some homes burned while others did not, and the fire smarting of those homes may have played a factor. FireSmart assessments are done to assess both public and private property to determine what can be done to make structures and property more resistant to fire. A key aspect of the FireSmart program is the structural ignition zone, which is comprised of 4 different priority zones. Each zone is assessed separately, and there's judging criteria based on the zone proximity. Some of the factors include the fuel, vegetation, and debris. Other factors include the structural building materials and design. This Community Wildfire Protection Plan makes a total of 29 recommendations. We will highlight the high priority recommendations first and at greater detail before having a look at the medium and lower priority items. Recommendations were prioritized based on their relative importance to reducing the likelihood of a wildfire spreading into the community, reducing impacts to critical infrastructure and property, and reduced negative economic and social impacts to the communities. Evacuation routes and muster points should be developed for each of the 5 areas within the CWPP. Residents must be aware of what to do in emergency procedures, both for wildfire and other natural emergencies. These maps should be distributed to the residents and made public on the SRD website. Recommendation 2 is to address the likelihood of human-caused ignitions by regulating open burning. This could be done with a bylaw. At a minimum, a bylaw should be applied to the Sayward Valley because it is in the Sayward Fire Department jurisdiction. As FireSmart is a grassroots program, it is driven primarily by volunteers. Finding a volunteer who will lead the charge as a FireSmart champion is often the key to implementing a successful FireSmart program. As many of these areas are remote, the SRD should consider having a remote or virtual workshop delivery. Recommendation follows up on recommendation 4. Once the FireSmart champion is trained, a FireSmart community hazard assessment should be conducted for residential properties to determine areas that should be addressed and then implement the strategies to do so. For publicly owned structures, FireSmart hazard assessments can also be done, such as on the Fire Hall No. 2 or the Sayward Heritage Hall. As building materials and construction design play a large role in the flammability of a building, property owners should be encouraged to incorporate FireSmart building materials and design. The free FireSmart 101 Home Development Guide should be advertised to homeowners, especially when new construction is being constructed. The Community Wildfire Protection Report and map should be available on the SRD website, and this video could be uploaded as well. Industrial users who operate in the area should also be aware of the plans. Then they can consider the recommendations into their operations and management. Different communication avenues to promote fire safety is a key in educating the public. The SRD already has several social media channels in place and could engage in increased communication of fire safety and awareness. For residents who do not use social media, physical documents can be mailed out to the residents, such as education pamphlets and FireSmart brochures. Communities should be encouraged to have an annual Community Fire Safety Day. That day could focus on fire safety related activities, fire suppression practice, and FireSmart activities. This Fire Safety Day could be timed with Fire Prevention Week, which happens annually during the 2nd week of October. Water availability is essential to wildland-urban interface fire suppression. Sayward should assess and ensure that they have adequate reservoirs at Fire Hall No. 2, as well as at the Sayward Junction. The Sayward Road right-of-way should be maintained and upgraded regularly, as is the main access and emergency evacuation routes for the village of Sayward and parts of Sayward Valley. This includes removal of hazardous fuel and consideration of replacing the single-lane bridge on Sayward Road. To maintain and improve interagency communication during emergencies, the SRD's emergency coordinator should meet with the BC Wildfire Service, Emergency Management BC, and local fire department representatives. They should discuss incident command and communication procedures in the event of a wildland-urban interface fire. Recommendation 27 looks to improve equipment availability for structure protection in WUI fires. The SRD should engage with Campbell River in a mutual aid agreement for the deployment of structural protection units in specified fire emergencies. As Walters Island, Esperanza, Browns Bay, and Eagles Cove do not have fire departments or fire suppression coverage, property owners there would potentially need to suppress a fire that threatens their own homes. A checklist of necessary equipment and emergency supplies should be provided to them so they are aware of what would be required. We will now examine 9 medium priority recommendations within this report. As mentioned earlier, the local wildfire risk assessment shows moderate and high risk within 500 meters of the Sayward Valley. Recommendation 3 identified 7 sites for potential fuel treatment areas. They should be further investigated by a qualified registered professional for the development of site-specific fuel management restrictions. This would help reduce the risk in these areas. The SRD should develop a wildfire safety and preparedness pamphlet to distribute to residents living within the Fire Protective Services area. It can include information on open burning, venting indices, relevant bylaws, and additional BC wildfire resources. Installing a fire danger sign at the visitor center in the Sayward Junction would draw attention to the current fire danger, as well as advise when fire bans are in effect, educating both local residents as well as visitors to the Sayward Valley and the North Island. The SRD should encourage residents to consider alternatives for backyard burning of woody debris and waste. There are other options, such as hauling it away or chipping. These alternatives should be communicated to the public on a regular basis. To reduce the fuel hazard along power line right-of-ways, the SRD should engage with BC Hydro to communicate the importance of fuel hazard abatement along power line corridors. To improve water availability for fire suppression in isolated areas in the Sayward Valley that does not have hydrant coverage, the SRD and the Sayward Fire Department should look to procure a water tanker to improve water availability. Recommendation 23. As the Sayward Fire Department is mostly volunteers, the fire department should always be seeking additional membership. Open houses and social media are both good ways to connect with interested parties within the Sayward Valley. Recommendation 24. Currently, not all members of the Sayward Fire Department have the Wildland Forest Firefight Level 1 training due to the timing and availability of the training, as well as financial resources. It is recommended that this training be offered to all members. To maintain Sayward's Fire Department's readiness for responding to WUI fires, cross-training and mock exercises should occur between the fire department and the BC Wildfire Service. These training sessions should include fire line construction, pump operations, sprinkler protection, portable water tank deployment, and wildland hose operations. Recommendation 29 looks to reduce the likelihood of structure fires from wildfire embers. This could be done by encouraging homeowners to purchase their own sprinkler kits. This is especially important for the residents in communities without fire protection services. These sprinkler kits can be set up around homes and on top of roofs. It can be a relatively low-cost method in extreme wildfire scenarios that can save houses. We'll now discuss the 4 low-priority recommendations within this report. Residents should be encouraged to use fire-resistant landscaping materials and design on their properties. They can refer to the Fire Smart Yard and Landscaping Guidelines. For areas in Sayward Valley that are outside hydrant coverage, other water sources should be considered. This could include dry hydrant installation or large-scale water storage options. To improve emergency evacuation communications in the community, residents should be encouraged to join the SRD's Connect Rocket. The Connect Rocket is a free emergency notification service that sends out notifications when an emergency occurs. The BC Wildfire Service requires safe landing areas for their helicopters and have expressed concern about landing in areas without designated pads. They prefer to know in advance where potential landing pads exist. The communities in the CWBP should consider having open areas that are maintained for helicopter landings. These areas should be designated on local emergency plans as well as on maps. To summarize, we reviewed the Community Wildfire Protection Plan for 5 small and unincorporated communities in Electoral Area A. This included Walters Island, Esperanza, Sayward Valley, Browns Bay, and Eagles Cove. Of these areas, only Sayward Valley has fire suppression coverage. All the others will rely on BC Wildfire in the event of a wildland-urban interface fire. For most of these communities, the local wildfire threat is low to moderate. Only Sayward Valley had heavier concentrations of moderate risk, with pockets of high risk, all within 500 meters of their structures. As most of the areas in the CWP are very remote, it is essential for homeowners to be prepared for emergency scenarios, which includes wildfire. Fire-smart education, awareness, and implementation can be very important to saving homes and structures. For more detailed information, please review the Community Wildfire Protection Plan report and associated high-resolution maps that are available on the SRD website. We'd like to thank the following individuals for sharing their time with us through meetings, phone calls, field reviews, and information and data sharing. Sean Koopman from the SRD for his vision and guidance throughout this project. Scott Boyd from Western Forest Products for providing LiDAR data that was so helpful in our threat and risk assessments. We'd also like to thank Ben, Raphael, and Todd from the BC Wildfire Service for providing us insight from their standpoint.